Alright, this is Civil Rights Now 6. There's only one more after this, alright? This is now the cost of the movement and also the legacy. So we're picking up in 1964 here, going probably about to 68. Now, 1965 is a very chaotic year. One of the biggest things that happens, though, is Malcolm X, as part of any Islamic religion, whether it be Islam or Nation of Islam, believes in a pilgrimage to a sacred city of Mecca. Malcolm X does this, seeing this as part of his religion. While there, he realizes his militant methods have been correct. And so he begins to see the light of nonviolence that Dr. King had. He actually changes, he reverses things. So when he returns to this country, he begins to talk about nonviolent protest. This actually angers a lot of people because he had been the face. And so while giving a speech, or getting ready for a speech rather, in Detroit, Michigan, Malcolm X will be murdered by members of the Nation of Islam. Basically, the idea of if we can't have them, can't nobody have them, and this is yet another long list of people who gave their life up for civil rights. So remember that when we look at what is this whole thing about. Now, 1965, with the end of segregation, there is one other big thing. There's actually two. The civil rights movement encompassed three big aspects. Number one was political. Number two, first was society. We have to end separate but equal. Number two was political. We have to provide for voter registration and people feeling like they can go and vote. And number three is economic. So far, we've accomplished some economics, some political, and a lot of social. Okay, but Dr. King wants, and a lot of African Americans, in fact, want a voter protection guarantee. They want the federal government to make sure African Americans are able to vote. So Dr. King is going to announce a march, and the march was called, nicknamed Bloody Sunday. This is the Selma March, okay? So Dr. King is going to go do the Selma March. When he gets there, they're getting ready. The sheriff, whose name was Jim Clark, sent a message, and he goes, if you march and you cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which is a big bridge in Selma, I have my deputies on my order, and they will beat you. So he's basically trying to lay a guideline and say, we don't care if you march, but if you cross this line, we're going to hurt you. Now, Dr. King really didn't back down from threats, and so what they do cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and in front of national TV cameras will be beaten. And in fact, a couple of people actually were killed. Now, while they're being beaten, on the TV cameras picked up a weird sound, and they heard them saying, the whole world is watching. The whole world is watching. Within a few days, a couple of people in other cities start popping up. We march with Selma, etc. And so this falls on the lap of the president. What are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about voter protection? And it's called the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, this is another big one. All right. So, nationwide prohibition of voting discrimination. Enforced voting rights, gave racial minorities the right to vote across the country, outlawed literacy test. No states and local governments can impose any voting qualifications. So the last of the disenfranchisement methods is gone. Poll tax was by amendment, literacy test by this, but the biggest one was a lesser-known little part of this, and it said federal authorities could actually intervene if necessary to get people to vote. Federal troops could come down and escort you into the polling place, let you vote, and walk you out so that you feel protected. This is what they wanted. Okay? In fact, that part about the federal coming down was only recently taken away by President Obama and Congress when they now felt that it was unnecessary. 2015. But this stood for 50 years. All right? Pretty interesting stuff. A couple of months after this, a very impoverished neighborhood of Southern California known as Watts uh, went into these riots. And this is going to sound like something out of maybe today. What prompted this was a traffic stop. Okay, a man was stopped in a traffic stop in Watts. It was an African American male with a white police officer. Uh, they ultimately decided that something was wrong, and so they decided, okay, we're not going to peacefully protest, we're going to riot. And so they run the cops out. They caused millions of dollars worth of damage. They stole a lot of things. Some people stole out of necessity, playpens and bottles. Other people stole out of just the spirit of stealing, liquor and things like that. When it's all said and done, uh, they're going to order the National Guard and some federal troops be sent out to end this whole chaotic thing. So they enter Los Angeles on the third day. Some people did die as the fires and the looting grew. Uh, but ultimately they got things accomplished. Now, what did we learn here? Why is this important? A lot of people seem to think that the civil rights movement was just society, ending segregation, and political. But there's a third aspect, and that is economics. If these people are stealing things that they need, that means they don't have a job, or they can't afford, or the jobs are not taken care of, and we got to fix that. Okay? So Johnson does that. Kennedy had already kind of given us the word for affirmative action, all right? Johnson's going to make Executive Order 11246, okay? And later on, it's actually amended by another executive order. But this is now the idea that to achieve affirmative action that Kennedy talked about, you can have an ethnic quota. In other words, if there's 10 spots, you can reserve 2 of those spots, or 3, or 4, or 5, or 6, or 7, whatever, for African Americans, or for Asians, or for Mexicans. It's actually okay. It's within the law. And so this is now ethnic quotas. We're going to see kind of the downfall of the ethnic quotas as we get to it. But again, this is to provide a chance for these jobs. So the people do not have to continue looting or whatever, and so these riots will stop. Because understand me, Watts was not the only one rioting at this time. There have been many others. Watts was probably the biggest one, though. Okay. Now, in 1966, James Meredith is going to set off on a one-man march, and he's going to march from, I believe it was Jackson, Mississippi, up to Memphis, up I-55. But when he reaches Hernando, Mississippi, he's shot by a white Citizens Council member in the leg. He survives. A man named Stokely Carmichael, who is associated with SNCC, he was the president of SNCC at the time, was in Greenwood, Mississippi. And upon hearing this, he said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. What this movement needs now," and the next 2 words he gives changes drastically what happens in the civil rights. And those 2 words are black power. Stokely Carmichael gives us the phrase black power. Now, black power is pride in being African American, taking pride in your culture, growing an afro, becoming productive members. It is not arming yourselves with the intent on creating your own society. Okay? So some people misunderstand this, some people don't, but black power is a big movement. Now, the group that maybe misunderstood this the most was called the Black Panther Party. Now, the Black Panther Party actually got some communist ideas. They actually wanted a separate part of the United States for African Americans, for communists, and everything else, okay? Separate doesn't work. We just got done with separate but equal, guys. We can't go back to that. Now, the Black Panther Party actually had a 10-point program on how they were going to accomplish this. However, they are looked into quite extensively because of their communist leanings, and one of their founding members, Huey Newton, will actually serve a pretty lengthy prison sentence. And so they really don't do much other than just kind of freak people out. Now, the Black Panther Party itself is now disbanded, but there is a new Black Panther Party, is what they're called, that are still around today. So the Black Panther Party, they're going to dress in all black. They're going to arm themselves with the Second Amendment, perfectly fine, but they are now another militant group. They are much like AIM, who is a militant group. They are much like the Nation of Islam, who is a militant group. Okay? All right. So where is Dr. King in all this? Well, he should be in the middle. Dr. King had actually set up and actually moved his entire family to the city of Chicago. And this is Chicago's King campaign. Chicago is a predominantly African-American inner city, a lot of poverty, and so he moves there with the intent of seeing what needs to be addressed. And upon living there, he goes, okay, I know what we got to do. We got to march. We got to bring people's attention, etc. The mayor of Chicago, a man named Richard Daley, approaches Dr. King and says, please don't march. We'll work out some type of deal, etc. And so they work out the deal. Dr. King leaves feeling like he has succeeded, when in actuality, Mayor Daley does nothing to continue what he had promised. And so this sticks with Dr. King, and he's not going to back down from a threat again, and maybe that is his downfall, okay? Well, it's definitely his downfall, okay? 1967, we have another big, massive riot. This time it is in Detroit, again, causing millions of dollars of damage, chasing the police out. National Guard is called out to put these things down. So we've had many, many riots, but the two big ones in Watts and Detroit are really beginning to stick in Johnson's brain, and he wants to understand why it happens. So Johnson will appoint a man named Otto Kerner to set up a commission, and a commission is basically where you study something out. And this commission is to study why are we having race riots in the 1960s in these big inner cities. Now, Otto Kerner and the Kerner Commission comes back with this statement here. Our nation is leaning towards two societies, one white and one black, separate and unequal. And anybody, and I mean, hindsight's always 50-50, and we go, well, duh. But he can't study this. Johnson's got to worry about, Vietnam and all these other things on his plate. So Kerner's going to set this up. So now the goal is, how do we integrate fully? How do we bring these two societies together and pose this from happening? And this still, to an extent, hasn't happened. De facto segregation is still alive and well, all right, in our day, in 2016. Now, this is where we bring up the FBI. The FBI, if you remember, was kind of attracted by the John Birch Society claim that Dr. King was, in fact, a member of the Communist Party, supporter. They had a program called COINTELPRO, right? And COINTELPRO was basically they were going to spy on the citizens. They had a file on Dr. King. And the weird thing is, really and truly, from Selma on, everywhere Dr. King went, the FBI was in that city. And it became kind of a question, how does the FBI know where Dr. King is? If you remember, there's an informant, you would call him a snitch, and I'm going to tell you who that is later on, but I'm just setting you up, okay? Now, in 1968, word comes in to the SLC office that Dr. King is needed in Memphis, Tennessee. The sanitation workers, aka the garbage men, had been on strike because they were not being paid enough, they were not receiving benefits, and they said, I'm not a black man, I'm not a white man, I'm not a garbage man, I am a man. That was their slogan, and it was really good. So as they're preparing to march, and Dr. King hits the scene, a riot breaks out on Beale Street, and rocks are thrown, etc. It calls out the National Guard. You can see them there. And the whole goal of this was actually to scare off the march from occurring. However, Dr. King says, nope, we're going to see it through. We're going to make this happen. And famously, Dr. King gave another one of his big famous speeches. And a lot of people said, well, did he know he was going to die? It's called the mountaintop speech, in which he says, and I'm paraphrasing, I've been to the promised land, I've been to the mountaintop, I've seen where we're going to go. Unfortunately, I'm not going with you. And no simple words. And so a lot of people assume that in Memphis, now, Dr. King received tons of death threats. So it's not just, he received death threats. There had to have been something else. Maybe he knew who the informant was before it actually happened. I don't know. Now, on April 4th, 1968, Dr. King will be assassinated outside of his room at the Lorraine Motel towards the end of the year. And we did this last year. It was great. Hopefully we'll be able to keep doing it. We're going to take students, the best performing students, ones who've worked their butt off and not missed days, to go to the Civil Rights Museum to experience all these things that I'm telling you. And it's a really neat experience. One of the impactful things they've done here is they've actually walled in his room. You can walk past his room and see in glass what's going on, and kind of walk out and look onto the balcony where he was. So, Dr. King is killed, and the nation again begins to freak out. There are riots all going out. They do come back with the name of one man. They said acted alone. His name is James Earl Ray. And there's a big part of the museum where they kind of bring up that. There's conspiracy theories here as well, okay? So, who did it? They caught the man they felt who did it, James Earl Ray. All right? And so with James Earl Ray now behind bars, we can go about how do we stop all this rioting and this looting, and everyone just feels upset. The man who is now put in charge and becomes kind of the face at the end here is a man named Ralph Abernathy. Ralph Abernathy takes over SCLC for Dr. King. He announces what is called the Poor People's Campaign. They're marching in Atlanta and places like that, trying to just bring down poverty. But there's a very interesting memoir, if you will, and it's called "And the Walls Came Tumbling Down." In this memoir, among other things, Abernathy says that Dr. King had a drug addiction as well as many mistresses, and a lot of people are upset with Abernathy because of this, going, why did you have to bring that up if it's true? If it's not, why are you lying? I mean, there's a lot of kind of pointed fingers at Abernathy. And so effectively here, about 1968, 1970, the modern civil rights movement is over. They've achieved many of the goals. There is still one more Civil Rights Act has to be passed in 1968, and that'll be the discussion last one.